you know, I started in theater in New York. Love theater, it's my first love. I started as an actor. Who's the actor? Yes. In that, you know, I realized people weren't like writing things for me. Go figure. So then I decided to start writing things for myself, and it found out I was pretty good at that. And so then I wrote, in New York when you're auditioning you need fresh material, so I wrote monologues for everybody in my acting class. And then I give him credit, my then boyfriend was like, well, you should publish them. Monologues, everybody, so I published, well, I went to all of Sam French and everybody, and they said no. So then I self-published, so all of you people with unpublished things, self-publish. And this was back in the day where it wasn't so easy. And then I sold out of my book of monologues. Sam French picked it up, it's still available, something for everyone. And so that started me writing. And then my stage play, I converted to a screenplay, moved to LA, and submitted to Disney Fellowship, which was doing screenplays back in that time. And I got a Disney Fellowship, and that screenplay got me a job in television. And then television, unless you're really bad in a room, you do one show, you probably will get another show. And so it's 1 hour drama that I write in, no concept of comedy. I never want to write in a comedy room, they're insane. From all of my friends who were in a comedy room, it's crazy. Write a comedy film, that's good, but TV.
I think I just found my calling.
What?
The comedy.
Yeah, write in a comedy room, they love it. I mean, it's too stressful for me. So, then I went off and did a documentary, and I'm also a publisher. I started publishing not only my own novels, because the thing about writing for TV or film, unless you're producing it yourself, you're waiting for someone to say yes to your product. And I got tired of waiting for people to say yes. So I started writing my own novel, and I self-published, and then I started publishing some other writers, and now I have an indie press. But I'm also developing some more TV, and I just developed and wrote a mini-series for Oprah Winfrey Network for Tulsa, Oklahoma, on the 1921 Tulsa race riot. And what's interesting is when we pitched and got it, and wrote it, and got paid for it, she wanted a mini-series, or they wanted a mini-series, but then all the series that they were also developing just took off. Mini-series is on the far back burner. So you write something, and this is kind of frustrating, you write it, everyone's excited, and then year to year things change, and it just goes on a burner. And did anyone see Oprah did Henrietta Lacks? She had that project for 10 years before it became a reality. So sometimes it's just a waiting game. More about that later in TV, we'll talk about that. And so here I am. Ken Lezebnik, who started this great program here at Stevens. I worked with him when we were both writers on Touched by an Angel, and we kept in touch with each other, and he said, hey, have you ever thought about teaching? And I'm like, yeah. I taught 7th grade for a year. Teach any other grade but 7th grade, because that's when they're all like preteen. And so I started working at the Stevens mentoring in their low residency MFA. And of all the MFAs that I've heard of, what's unique about this one is that all of the professors and mentors are working writers, not an academic among us. Well, Dr. Roseanne is, but we met her also in Touched by an Angel. So those 10 days that the writers spend in Jim Henson Studios in Los Angeles are workshops with industry speakers. We go to the Writers Guild Library. We go to writers' rooms to sit in and see what it's really like in a TV writers' room. And we get all kinds of speakers that producers and writer-producers, showrunners come in and really get an experience of what it's like in Hollywood. So, and that's unique to the Stevens program. So if anybody's thinking about a master's, I'd say go for it. Students love it. Talk to us later. So screenwriting, that's what we're doing today. Screenwriting is wonderful. You can create something, a story that you can tell that can move people. Probably everyone has had a movie that maybe it didn't change your life, but it impacted you. It reflects a truth to you. And there are lots of screenplays, and there are lots of good ones and some bad ones. But we're talking about crafting a screenplay. I was taught by Sid Field. Who knows who Sid Field was? Sid Field wrote the original book analyzing how to get an idea out of your head and onto the page back in 1979. Screenplay, The Foundations of Screenwriting, is considered the original screenwriting Bible. And I learned from Sid. Sid taught me his method, and I'm one of 4 students taught by Sid to lecture on screenwriting using his screenwriting method. And so it's a craft that can be learned. The content is up to you. And whether it's good content or not, or if it's an engagement, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the skills and the craft of putting it together. The creativity and the inspiration comes from the individual writer. Because obviously, a lot of people can write a well-structured screenplay, but is it a good one? And any good movie that you've seen has good structure. They've followed certain, and so for some people, storytelling structure is natural. Beginning, middle, and end, not necessarily in that order. But it is something that some people know inherently how to tell a good story and know what needs to happen next. But one of the things about screenwriting, and Sid often used this quote from Jose Rivera, who wrote the Motorcycle Diaries, about Che Guevara's motorcycle ride. But what he said about the craft of screenwriting is that screenwriting is like building a piece of furniture. In terms of form and function, it is a craft in which all the pieces must fit. Mastering the elements of craft and making them natural and invisible is the trick to writing screenplays. You have to learn it, then you have to unlearn it, or you have to learn it and disguise it so that the audience never sees the machinery of the screenwriting itself. There's a movie called Speed. Who's seen the movie Speed? It's not a work of art, but it grabs you and takes you through that movie. It was a movie, Josh Whedon actually was an uncredited writer on that movie, but it knew the elements of screenwriting and visual storytelling, because it's Keanu and Sandra and they're on a bus, but the action carries you through that movie. And I know what's gonna happen, but I get caught up every time I see it. And so that's what you wanna do in your screenplay. Get Out recently. How many of you saw Jordan Peele's horror movie? That was I was so glad it won the screenplay Oscar, because the movie just drew you in, and it was a confident storytelling. And it took them a couple of years, maybe 10, to write. So, come on in. So that's what we're gonna talk about. And so the question always is, what is a screenplay? Come on, join us. Have a seat. Andrea's checking people in over there. So let's look at a few distinctions. A novel, many short story writers and novelists who are gonna self-publish. A novel, for basic definition, is a narrative line of action that usually occurs through the eyes of the main character, and it's through the mindscape of dramatic action. Sometimes that's why it's so hard to adapt a novel to a film, because it's in people's heads. And in a play, the action occurs on stage through the language of dramatic action. You know, the words are really important. As funny story, showrunner that I worked with on Any Day Now on Lifetime, she did a show called Saving Grace, and Holly Hunter was the lead. And so they were doing the table read of the script, and people were ad-libbing, and she's like, "What are you doing? I mean, that's not the cue," because she's from theater. And it's like the playwright's words were golden, and she was just stunned that people in TV the actors would change things. And she's like, "No, that's not what the writer wrote. That's theater, and we respect theater. Shakespeare's fault." But a screenplay, and this is important, this is Sid's definition of a screenplay, is a story told with pictures, in dialogue and description, and placed within the context of dramatic structure. A story told with pictures and dialogue and description, and placed within the context of dramatic structure. And sidfield.com is a great website, and you can find the paradigm that he used to place the screenplay on. And it's really, and he got that idea of a story told with pictures because he was looking at a series of panels from the Renaissance of images of, I don't know if it was it told a biblical story, but it was just the pictures that told the story. I gave this example last night at dinner, is who's read the Harry Potter books and saw the movies? Great. I'm not gonna, if you don't know it by now, this is a spoiler. So, in the last movie, in the book, Neville Longbottom kills the snake, right? And there's the confrontation in front of the castle, and there's the bad guys over here, and then he gets the opportunity, he gets the sword, he cuts off the snake's head, and that's one of the Horcruxes. So I'm watching the movie, and there's the battle in Hogwarts, and the snake is chasing Hermione and Ron all over, and I'm like, no, they don't kill the snake, Neville kills the snake. But the snake is going around, and it's all this action, and they're going up the stairs, and I was like, but Neville kills the snake. And then it goes after, and then just as it attacks, the head of the snake comes up from the screen, and then there's a sword slash and black smoke, and the head comes off, and as the smoke clears, there's Neville holding the sword. And I'm like, that's visual storytelling. What was in the novel worked because you had this whole context and you created it in your head. But when they adapted it for the film, they made it visual. Same thing happened, Neville killed the snake, but they made it visual. And that's something that, there's a great book to read, Adventures in the Screen Trade by William Goldman, wrote Butch Cassidy, and The Sundance Kid, among other great, Misery. He adapted Misery, Stephen King, from book to screen. And if you haven't seen Misery, this is another spoiler. So, in the book, when she captures him and kidnaps him and he's gonna run away, to keep him from leaving, in the book, she cuts off his feet. But Goldman was like, nobody wants to see Jimmy Kahn with no feet. It's like, we need a whole hero. What can I do? Because I'm gonna stay true to the book. So what did he do? Who remembers that hobbling scene? It accomplished the same thing, but we still had a whole hero. And so one of his rules of adaptation from book to screen is sometimes you're gonna have to change things. But as long as you stay true to the intent, it can work. And that's also the craft of screenwriting. You come up with something that is visual, and you pay attention to what's gonna work on screen and what's gonna make people comfortable or uncomfortable. So when we talk about structure, it's a linear arrangement of related incidents, episodes, or events that are leading to a dramatic resolution with a definite beginning, middle, and end, and again, not necessarily in that order. How many movies, great movies we've seen where the end is at the beginning and then it switches things around. So Sid created something called a paradigm. And some people love it, some people hate it. But there are different reasons why people don't like it. Because, however, but we're gonna talk about how it works. You need 4 things when you're going to start writing a screenplay. You need to know where it ends first. What is your resolution? Sid likened it to very few people I've ever heard of who go to the airport and go, okay, I'll go there for my vacation. You plan, you know where you're going. Doesn't mean you're going to get there, but that you know where you're going to end up. And then you need to know your beginning. It's the second thing you need to know. How does the story begin? And then you need to know 2 other things. One is, Sid used the term plot point 1. Plot point 1 happens at the end of the first act of your screenplay. And we're looking at a screenplay that is in the Aristotelian 3-act structure. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. The end of Act 1, and where does that fall, is usually your typical movie is an hour and a half, 120 pages. So you've got your 30 minutes is your setup, 60 minutes is your main confrontation, and then 30 minutes is your ending. And Sid also went so far as to say plot point 1 happens somewhere within the first half hour of your movie, maybe around page 25 to 30 something, because a page of a screenplay is about a minute's worth of movie, unless you're talking about Lord of the Rings, where it's like a 90-page script, but it's a 3-hour movie, you know. So, or more recently, A Quiet Place. Very little dialogue. So it was a full movie, but it was only like a 70-page script. Or no, it wasn't even 70.
40 something.
Yeah. So, but it took over that whole movie time. So around about page 25 to 35 or something, something happens that moves you from your setup to your confrontation. And that's called plot point 1. That's the 3rd thing you need to know. What is that thing that happens? It could be an incident, a decision, something. Who's seen The Hunger Games? So who can tell me what the plot point 1 in The Hunger Games, the first movie?
Wouldn't it be when Katniss is like volunteers in tribute?
That's what I thought. But does that lead us into what the main confrontation is? What happens when she says, I volunteer, she saves her sister. And she just takes her place. The plot point, actually, as Sid pointed out, is that moment on the train to the Capitol when Katniss, and usually your plot point relates to something your main character does or decides. She makes the decision to fight. They make the decision to actually play the game. Before that, the setup is, okay, we have this reaping, my sister's name got called, I can't let my sister go, so I'm gonna go, and nobody from us ever wins, so I just save my, and who knows if I'm coming back. But on the train, they confront Hamish, and they say, look, you gotta stop drinking because you're here to help us, and we wanna come back home. And Hamish says, oh, I've got a couple of fighters this year. Okay, don't mess with my drinking, and I will help you win. But you have to do what I say. And boom, we're in the Capitol, and she's getting her legs waxed. And she doesn't want to. But they decided to play the game. That was the decision that moved us from the setup to the confrontation of playing the game. That was plot point 1, happened to fall on page 28 of the screenplay. Read screenplays. That's also the thing you need to know. Read them, the ones you love, and see where, read it, then watch it, and see what was made it to the screen. But read it first, and then study it, analyze it, break it down into the end, the resolution. The end is not necessarily the last scene. The end is what is the resolution, the beginning, and find the plot points. So that was the plot point 1 in The Hunger Games. What was plot point 2 comes at the end of Act 2 and leads you into your resolution. Other systems like Save the Cat or McKee or other people have different words for it. because I would say that Katniss saying I volunteer was an inciting incident, but it was not the plot point. Okay? So the plot point at the end of Act 2 of The Hunger Games. What moved us to the resolution?
The berry scene.
Which berry scene?
The final.
The final
with Katniss and Peter.
Could be. Could be. But when did they make that decision to eat the berries? Or was it when Peter almost was collecting berries and almost ate them, and she saved them?
No, it was right after the announcement.
Right after the announcement that they could win?
That they could
I think that was the midpoint, because there's another one. You have the 4 things to start in, beginning, plot point 1, plot point 2, and then as you go into it further, there's the midpoint, so you can break up Act 2. So the midpoint was the announcement. But I would agree. Does anyone else have an idea of what was plot point 2 that moved us to the resolution? I would agree that it was when they won. Oh, yes? No, I thought you were raising your hand. It was when the second announcement came after they were the last 2 standing, and they says, oh, oops, changing the rules, only one of you can win, so you have to fight to the death. And Katniss and Peeta made the decision, no, we will kill ourselves. Before they'll do the Romeo and Juliet thing before they kill each other. And when they made that decision, the Capitol decided, no, that's okay, you guys are the winners. And it moved us to the resolution where they win, they go home, President Snow's pissed, they kill the game maker, and it sets us up for book 2. And the writer of The Hunger Games was a TV writer who wrote those books. So very clearly she knew how to write episodic. And she got her idea watching the news and watching all these pageants and competitions and said, ideas come from anywhere. So those are the 4 things you need to structure your screenplay. So when you're structuring something, you're building something, and then the relationship between all those things, they're all connected. The writers of South Park came to talk to some students, and they say, we don't write this happens, and this happens, and this happens. It has to connect. This happens, therefore this happens. And then they make a decision, and therefore this happens. And because that happens, therefore they have to do something else. So it's not and then, because then you're just writing a series of scenes. They all have to be connected. It's like when you're playing a game of chess, it has 4 elements. It has the pieces, the board, the players, and the rules. Take one of those things out and it's not chess anymore, right? Same thing with the screenplay. It has action, characters, scenes, sequences, music, locations, acts 1, 2, and 3, and maybe some special effects. So every scene, every sequence is every act is a unit of dramatic structure. And they have each scene has a beginning, middle, and end. And that's going to result into another scene that has a beginning, middle, and end. And there are different writers about writing who can break down your story not in 3 acts, but within Act 1, they break it down into 2 15-minute things. Again, it's still the same basic structure, 30 pages of action, but look at what the sequence method, I think, is another way that people write their screenplays, so that you can, if you sit down and go, oh, I'm on page 1, I need to get to a page 120, you'll lose. So, okay, I can do the first 30 pages. Okay, I know what's going to be the setup. And you break it down so that you can do that. And sometimes you might want to write your ending first so that you know what you're writing to. There's a Hitchcock story. He always wanted to film on Mount Rushmore. What movie is that? North by Northwest. And he was co-writing this like, okay, we're gonna start in New York, and we're gonna end up here, and we're gonna meet at Mount Rushmore. So they knew where they were writing to. And that's always important, know where you're writing. So for some writers, it makes sense to figure out those 4 things and then write the resolution first. And we talk about basically the screenplay is about a character, and it's about the action. The action is what happens and who does it happen to. Really easy. We're going to talk about more about that in the TV part. And the context is a space like a bowl, but you can put anything in the bowl. And that's what the paradigm is. It's like a bowl, it's a context. And it's up to the writer to put cherries in it, or strawberries, or cereal, or whatever. So that's up to your creative muse. But there is a definite structure, context and content. And that does bring us to the paradigm. I wish I had a piece of chalk. Chalk is coming, great. So it's a straight line. You have your setup, and that's something we're gonna do in our little workout section. Whatever idea you have, we're gonna put it on the paradigm. Because that's how you start. Know where you wanna resolve. Who is your character? What do they want? And that's something we call dramatic need. What do they want? And the end is, are they gonna get it? The dramatic need, what is it your character wants to win, gain, get, accomplish, or whatever? My favorite, who's seen the movie Silverado? Scott Glenn says at the top of the movie, you know, I'm just going to pick up my brother in Silverado and we're heading to California. But he gets out of prison, and the first scene, people are shooting up at him. And it's like, he survives, kills everybody, and he gets their horses, and then he's like, I'm just going to pick up my brother so we can go to California. But then he finds Kevin Kline in the desert buried up to his head. He's not going to leave him there, so he saves Kevin Kline. They ride along, and then Kevin Kline finds the people that stole his horse and everything, and he ends up shooting a couple of people, getting his hat back. And he's very partial to that hat in that movie, but very important. Notice the hat this gentleman is wearing, very important. So then he's just going to get his brother, but he gets there and his brother's in jail. Oh God, I gotta break him out of jail. So then he gets help from Kevin Kline because he helped him, and then they get involved in the whole city, and then they're the people in the wagon train, and then he says, and he says it several times in the movie. Just going to pick up my brother so we can go, and then they have to save the town, and then the other stories came in because Danny Glover saves him, and then he saves Danny Glover, and blah, blah, blah. All I wanted to do was pick up my brother and go to California. That was his dramatic need, and it took him. What's the dramatic need in Lord of the Rings?
Destroy the ring.
The dramatic need was to take that ring and take it to Mount Doom or something, I only saw Obi-Wan, and destroy the ring. How many movies did that dramatic need take? 3 long movies, 1 dramatic need. Okay? So that's the thing you need to know is what is your main character? Who is the main character? Who is the story about? What is the dramatic premise? What the story is about? And what is the dramatic situation? The circumstances surrounding the action. Talked about plot points. I'm moving through my whole thing. So Act 1 is usually about 1 to 30 pages. Takes you through the setup. Act 2 is usually about 60 pages. That is your main confrontation. That can be broken up into a midpoint. So you can write from plot point 1 to the midpoint and then midpoint to plot point 2. and then your resolution's about 30 minutes or 30 pages. So it's really a simple structure to follow. And creating a beat sheet or an outline. I mentioned the sidfield.com website. There is a series of interviews that Sid did with Hollywood screenwriters, and one of them wrote Little Miss Sunshine. And he talks about how when he figures all these things up, he has the map of his story on 4 pages that's up on the bulletin board. Act 1, part 1 of Act 2, part 1 of Act 2, 2 of Act 2, and then Act 3. The whole map of his film is on 4 pieces of paper on his bulletin board. If you can figure that out, then you just start writing. And just like if you're taking a road trip, you have a destination, but tangents, like Scott Glenn and Silverado. He had a straight line of action he wanted, but he kept going on what they call the blue highways on a map. You get off into tangents to look at the exciting things that are happening over there. You get drawn into other things, but you keep track of your main premise. Or else you'll get lost. And it's during Act 2 that your main character encounters the obstacle after obstacle. You have good people and you throw bad things at them. That's what storytelling is. And then they're struggling to get their thing, but you got to throw things at them. Sort of like life, but not quite. This is my other favorite quote from Sid Field. All drama is conflict. Without conflict, you have no action. Without action, you have no character. Without character, you have no story. And with no story, you have no screenplay. So you need action, conflict, because some stories of, what's the movie? Famous F. Scott Fitzgerald. Thank you, The Great Gatsby. So difficult to adapt that to screen. Because you got this passive character. So it's always using the journalist guy or the writer guy to tell the story, but then he's observing. So often the adaptations of Great Gatsby aren't fulfilling enough. Because if your character doesn't do anything, but doesn't get any conflicts, you're really not gonna stick around for that show. I'm trying to, there we go. Where's my page? So you have your character, something happens to your character, obstacle after obstacle, and it proves, someone talks of the midpoint being that point of no return, where I've gotten this far, I have to go, I can't go back to the way things were. When I think about Thelma and Louise, when another book of Sid's, in 4 screenplays, he speaks with 4 screenwriters about how they created the movie. And for Thelma and Louise, she insisted, you make this movie, when you make this movie, okay, I can work with you, but they're going off the cliff. And it's like, well, do they have to, and she said, no. She stuck to it. And she said, you have to guarantee that they go over the edge. Because she said, that's the whole point, is that these women experienced newfound freedom and expression, and there was no way they were going back to business as usual. And the whole point of them going off the cliff is they made that decision, as drastic as it is, that we're not going back. We've come too far. And even though that's not the midpoint of the movie, that point where your character has come so far, like our good friend Scott Glenn, with chalk. Oh, chalk! Yay! Thank you, Steph.
We're gonna mess up the walls.
The theater, we can do this.
Yes, theater, you can do anything.
Yes.
I love it. your character sticks with their dramatic need. Sometimes their dramatic need can change, and that's okay too. And sometimes as you're writing, your resolution might change. It's like they're gonna win after all, or they're gonna die after all. I have a novelist friend who had a detective series, and he was in book 5, and it's like he had written him into a situation, and he's like, he can't get out of that. He's gonna die. It's the main character of his novels. But it didn't end his novels because there was a secondary character who then became the main character. But he had written it, and he said the only logical thing, because I painted him into this situation, is he's not coming out. And you have to be willing sometimes to make those difficult decisions. I highly recommend, well, actually I highly recommend all of Sid's books because they speak to you at different places of where you are when, as you're writing. And sometimes you need, the workbook, which is the second book in his series of screenwriting books, because you're actually working with a piece of material, not starting fresh. And then there's Problem Solver for when you're actually in your screenplay and it's not working, and you need to pick out what the problem is. And then of course there's analysis for screenplays, analyzing screenplays, as well as Going to the Movies, which is his memoir of his life, and how he came to recognize. And that's a fair point. He was an actor, and then he worked at Cinemobile reading screenplays. And he read, I have 500 screenplays, and there are only 4 that I'm going to recommend to my producers. Why is that? And he tried to figure out what it was that made him reject all of those screenplays. And you've heard it before, I'm sure. The first 10 pages of your screenplay are the most important. Because if I'm not willing to turn the page, I'm not buying your screenplay. You need to set up something very important in those first 10 pages. And in TV, the first 5 or 3 of your pilot, because you got to keep us reading. And that's why you have to be very clear on what it is you want. So there's a paradigm. Starts with this straighter line than this. Talked about here could be your midpoint. And this is, I hope you can see that.
Just to go.
Yeah, I am kind of mumbling to myself. I will go back. No, that's not right. Don't write that down. Do you have an eraser? So, that's what the paradigm looks like. Act 1, 2, and 3, You set up confrontation resolution, plot point 1, plot point 2, midpoint if you want, first 30 pages, next 60 pages, final 30 pages. And from this map, you can write anything.